Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Really glad to have you with us for the Wednesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Jim Garrity is away, and here in his place, Inez Stepman of the Independent Women's Forum. She's also host of the High Noon podcast, which I highly recommend that you check out. And Inez, great to have you back with us. Not a slow news day, to be sure.
It's great to be here, Greg. Thank you.
No good martinis, because we have pretty much two bad ones and a crazy one. So let's start with the first bad one. This story broke yesterday, but the details have changed a little bit. This initial reporting was done by Jenny Terr of the New York Post about 6 Russian nationals being arrested by ICE on suspicion of terrorism plotting here in the United States. Now the details have changed. There are 8 people, all men, and they are from Tajikistan. Nonetheless, the basic facts of the story remain. All 8 of the men, according to Karen Townsend over at Hot Air, crossed the southern border illegally. Allegedly, no derogatory information was flagged on any of them. U.S. Customs and Border Protection and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security claimed that nothing showed up as they were processed. But now they are all in ICE custody, arrested in New York, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, with suspected plans of committing terrorism. A wiretap was used in this sting, and one Russian was heard as part of those conversations talking about bombs. So the details are certainly fuzzy, but the FBI and Homeland Security issued a joint statement saying that they're really concerned about this. The FBI and DHS have recently described in public and partner bulletins that the U.S. has been in a heightened threat environment. The FBI and DHS will continue working around the clock with our partners to identify, investigate, and disrupt potential threats to national security. So under normal circumstances, given all the complexities in the world, you'd be worried about these things. When you're basically waving people through at the southern border, Inez, it makes it a whole lot harder to stop these people. And yes, apparently it's hard to get good background information from Tajikistan on who's coming through. But nonetheless, it seems like this is just a turnstile at the subway or a ball game here rather than real tough scrutiny of what's going on at the border.
Yeah, I mean, what do you expect if you let in literally thousands of people every single day without, it's not possible to vet in any serious way the people coming across the border. And that's just the people who are turning themselves in, right? That's just the people that are actually making contact with Border Patrol. We have a completely open southern border. Hope this doesn't happen, but I don't know what people expect. That we can completely have a lawless border, which is bad for us for cultural reasons. It's bad for immigration reasons. It's bad for economic reasons. It's bad to let the cartels make, millions and millions of dollars smuggling people and drugs across our border. It creates problems for the people who live along the side of that border. And that there's all these problems related to the border. But this is the most basic of them all, which is that if you don't know who's coming into the country, you don't know that you're stopping people who mean us harm. And look, we've had these problems for a long time. Don't forget the 9/11 hijackers were here on visa overstays, right? We have had a problem with enforcing who should and should not be in the country for a very long time. It's not a single administration. It's not, it's really a multi-party and multi-administration failure and multiple, iterations of elected Congress that refuse to fix this very basic problem, which not to put too fine a point on it, but this is what governments exist for.
Right.
If they're not going to do anything else, right, it would be to provide for the national and common defense and to enforce the basic borders of the country. But somehow there has been, for different reasons on the left and the right, this decades-long handshake agreement that this situation is okay. And then, of course, it's exploded into complete lawlessness under the Biden administration.
Exactly right on multiple counts there. First of all, Andy McCarthy, who sometimes subs for Jim as well, pointed out that the terrorism case that he tried against the Blind Sheikh for the 1993 World Trade Center bombing and plots to attack other New York City landmarks back in the 90s, there were immigration components of that, too. People part of the plot who came in illegally the exact same way. And now when you put this on steroids, with much bigger numbers, and a huge percentage of these are young males traveling by themselves. And so that needs to raise multiple red flags as well. And the thing that always frustrates me, Inez, is that, they do catch people on the terrorism watch list, and they will catch some drugs coming in, and then they'll say, look, it's working. We caught this. It's proof that the system is working, when in reality, they're catching a sliver of the child trafficking, the human trafficking, the drug trafficking, and the terrorists potentially coming across the border, especially when you've got, I think, at least 2 million gotaways where they really have no idea who they are, what they're up to, or where they are in the country.
Yeah, I mean, 2 points I agree with that you just brought up. One is this reminds me a little bit of the security theater around the TSA, right? Where like they send, whatever it is, MSNBC sends through some people with box cutters or whatever it is, and only a small percentage of them actually get caught by the geniuses that operate the TSA system. But the second thing, you pointed to who is coming, and that has changed quite a lot, even in just the last couple years, right? The majority of immigration for a long time, even illegal immigration into the United States, which again had all of its own problems, were essentially migrant workers from Mexico and Latin America. That comes with its own set of problems, but it doesn't have necessarily very often this kind of national security component to it. Right now, what we have are people who are, as you say, a lot of young men coming across from a much wider variety of countries. I mean, if you look at any of the reporting that's been done on the border, I mean, people are coming from North Africa, right? People are coming from Arab countries. People are coming from the stands, right? The stands of the former Soviet Union. There's a different profile to the kind of person who is crossing the border now than there was even 2 years ago, let alone 5 or 10 years ago. And we're still talking about this debate as though it's primarily an economic or sort of migration issue, which it is in addition to this. But I can tell you just, down the street from me, right, in the park, when I see the illegal migrants who have come and been bused to New York City, they are not, these are not like Mexican laborers who are looking to make, $10 an hour off of the books. These are men from primarily African and Muslim countries who have, couldn't be more obvious, have no idea how to operate in a Western society. I mean, it's as a woman walking by, like these packs of men, like you feel like you're, the only comparison I have is East Jerusalem, right? You feel the cultural distance there. And that's not, to touch the topic that we started with this martini, right? Which is a non, trivial percentage of these people hold views that are antithetical to the United States, and a small percentage of them act on those views and have the kind of ties that are able to act on those kinds of hostilities to the United States. And nobody's questioning that, like, I don't want to say nobody's questioning. Obviously we are, but there is this massive legal system of asylum seeking, which is not the way our asylum laws are supposed to work, right? There's just this acceptance that we have this completely lawless situation, and that we're letting in potentially millions of people from places in the world where the majority of people want to hurt us.
Perfectly said. Yeah, absolutely. A lot of these people, we've seen the number of Chinese nationals swell big time this year. And let's just take the 8 from Tajikistan. The whole point of the asylum system, the way it's supposed to work, if you feel persecuted in your country, which is really a tiny fraction of the motivation for these people coming here. But the point is, you're supposed to find safe haven in the country closest to where you were persecuted. The idea that the United States is the closest place that you can find safe haven from a government that wants to kill you from Tajikistan? Please.
Yeah. It has become this massive loophole in our law, which, again, it was never intended to be, right? This was supposed to be a small percentage of the people coming to the United States were supposed to qualify for this kind of asylum. It is an artifact of the United States, a very noble impulse on our part that many times we are a beacon of freedom to the world, and that people who are persecuted by tyrannical governments around the world hope to come to the United States and find freedom. But this has this sort of small area of the law has expanded into basically a get into the United States free card, something that the Joe Biden administration, they said they couldn't do anything about immigration, right? They said that Congress had to act. That was obviously a lie at the time. Everyone knew it was a lie at the time. Now they're saying they will act in a way that they said they didn't have the power to do. And one of the things that they're fortunately saying they're going to do now, obviously for political reasons, we'll see if they actually follow through on it, is to stop releasing these people into the United States with court dates, for asylum hearings 13 years from now, which is effectively a license to disappear and work and live and do whatever one would want to do in the United States in the interim.
Exactly. And if something horrible does happen, the Democrats will blame the Republicans for not passing the Senate immigration bill or something like that, even though the barn door's been left wide open now for decades, but certainly ramped up big time over the last few years. All right, Inez, on to our second bad martini. The underlying news is slightly good. Not nearly as good as the Biden administration wants us to believe, but core CPI in the month of May ticked down slightly from 3.4% year over year to 3.3% year over year. Historically, 2% and under is where you want to be. And of course, the Trump campaign is happy to point out that when Joe Biden took office, inflation in this country was 1.4% year over year. And Joe Biden, of course, claiming time and time again in interviews that he inherited 9% inflation, which is a bald-faced lie, and very few people call him on it. But Biden coming out with a statement today about this slight tick down in core CPI. And he says, I know many families are feeling squeezed by the cost of living, which is still too high. That is why I'm fighting to lower costs for hardworking Americans by increasing rental assistance and building 2 million new homes, taking on big pharma to lower prescription drug prices, calling on grocery chains, making record profits to lower grocery prices, and investing in affordable clean energy while record energy production is lowering gas prices now. Republicans have a different approach, one that cuts taxes for the wealthy and large corporations, allows special interests like big pharma and big oil to keep prices high, and supercharges inflation by imposing across-the-board tariffs. They're fighting for billionaires on Park Avenue. I'm fighting for families like the ones I grew up with in Scranton, unquote. And as there are a number of different areas that we could have target practice here with, the one that really jumped out to me is, quote, calling on grocery chains making record profits to lower grocery prices. Anybody who knows how the grocery industry works means their margins on each individual sale are microscopic. But when inflation forces prices up, the margin that they need to make it worth their time, the percentage there stays the same, but the actual amount is going to increase a little bit. And the same thing happened when gas prices were soaring past $4 and up to $5 there in the early months of the Biden administration. And so he was talking about record profits again. And it's the same principle in gross numbers, yes, but it's to account for the massive inflation that your policies have triggered here. So what do you make of this particular gaslighting and whether the American people are going to buy it?
Yeah, so the particular gaslighting is just the newest iteration, right? At first, the line from the Biden administration was, inflation is imaginary, the bad economy is imaginary. Why do people, that we saw all those kinds of headlines, why do people feel the economy is not good, even though it's fantastic, right? And when that didn't work out so well, continually gaslighting people about the state of the economy and their own wallets, they've moved on to this line, right? Which is that this is the fault of profit-seeking corporations. They're padding their bottom line and using inflation as an excuse. Now, there is some of that presumably going on in certain industries. There was a study that came out from the San Francisco Fed recently that showed, though, that the overall profit margins among most sectors are flat over the course of the last couple years. So meaning the margins haven't changed for companies. What's changed is, as you say, the underlying cost of goods and services in the economy, and that's driving the price up. In other words, what everyone already knew, which is inflation. My local grocery store knows that, right? They actually posted a list of what things cost them, presumably because people were complaining about the high prices, right? So it was what it costs us to buy 1 pound of ground beef. And they straight up just posted all of their costs and how much they've gone up by. So for beef, it was 33% from last year. So they're passing on, obviously, those things to their customers. They can't not, as you say, like their margins are small. But so the idea that this is all coming from corporations and greed is, of course, another form of the latest gaslighting from the Biden administration. That being said, in all of that quote that you just read, I think Republicans often forget that Joe Biden is the last I mean, he's a liar, as he is about many other things, but he's one of the last Democrats that campaigns as sort of a labor Democrat. And I think because a lot of conservatives, especially the chattering classes of conservatives, right, follow day to day what the Joe Biden administration is doing, especially on cultural issues, they laugh at the idea that Joe Biden is some kind of like moderate blue dog labor Democrat. But if you look at what he actually says in campaign speeches, if you look at his State of the Union addresses that he's given, he's really focused on that traditional labor Democrat FDR sounding platform, which I disagree with philosophically, of course, but I think we would be foolish to underestimate that actually sounds really good to a lot of people. I think the specific thing about inflation and gaslighting people, I think will not work very well for the Biden administration. But I think that overall messaging about how, about the tax cuts for the wealthy, all the things that we're used to hearing from sort of old school Democrats before they were exclusively talking about men who wanted to become women. I think that stuff sounds better to the average American voter than a lot of people in our circles might think it sounds.
No, I think you're right about that. And I think you're also right about the point about Biden not getting away with it in this particular cycle. People know how much more they're paying. You can't gaslight people on the grocery store and the gas pump. And so they largely blame him. But I think you make a good point that somebody like maybe Sherrod Brown, who hasn't really stood up to the Biden at all on this, but sees himself as a populist, as kind of that old school labor guy, he might fare better than Joe Biden in Ohio. I don't know if he'll win. The state is trending more Republican, but people who kind of make his argument, Tim Ryan made that argument, didn't quite work against J.D. Vance, but it was a pretty close race in 2022. So it might work better for others than it will for him. The other thing that makes it fun on a couple of fronts is that, A, Biden obviously represented Delaware for 36 years in the U.S. Senate, which is like corporation central. And so he was kind of doing their bidding for 3.5 decades. And now he's wielding the big oil and big grocery and big whatever is really the problem here, not my policies. But he wants the corporations to pay their fair share, which means he wants their taxes to go up. And he's probably in favor of some more regulations. And if he thinks that's going to drive down grocery prices or prices in a lot of different industries, I think he's got another thing coming.
Yes, it's a good point about Delaware, right? Delaware is known for two things, the Biden family and for being a tax haven for major corporations. That's why that, nearly every huge national and even international company has a headquarter office in Delaware. If you ever drive through Delaware, you'll see a lot of very household corporate names. And that's because the state of Delaware is very friendly to corporations. So it is particularly funny that Joe Biden is putting on this mantle. That being said, I think he does it quite effectively. I mean, that at least in those times where he's had the right shots in the morning, his State of the Unions, again, I think a lot of the coverage of the States of the Union or State of the Unions. I'm not sure where the plural goes there, but the coverage has been about some of his rhetoric about January 6th, about division, about the evil, Nazi Republicans or whatever. Some of that divisive language has been little pieces of sort of his cultural agenda and other things. The vast majority of what he talks about on the stump and in those speeches is a defense of his administration economically, his defense of unions, right? His defense of, and a lot of it isn't true. And we can dig into the numbers as we do with inflation and see that it isn't true. But I think we forget that is actually the impression that a lot of people, a lot of voters have of Joe Biden, is that he focuses on those issues. And yeah, I mean, I think it's funny that he has created that impression while coming from Delaware. But I do think that's a larger piece of how people think about Joe Biden, to the extent he still has people who think about him positively. I think it's that messaging. And there isn't really anyone, maybe Sherrod Brown can, I don't know. But on the national level, there isn't anybody coming up behind Joe Biden who can really sell that message, even as well as Joe Biden from Scranton can. As sort of BS as all of that is, right? If you think about the leadership of the party coming up behind him, it's mostly millennials and, mostly people who are really, really focused on the culture war and on the revolution, let's say. And he might actually be the last of the Democrats who can even fake this kind of Democrat.
Yeah. When the issue comes up in the debates, assuming they happen, I think that'll be his argument. For the most part, I think his campaign is just going to be Trump's unacceptable, and don't forget about abortion. And that's pretty much the twin pillars of his campaign. But we'll see if he's able to hold on to any of those supporters who are really, really frustrated about his handling of the economy. Well, grocery prices remain stubbornly high despite what the Biden administration tells you, but it's still really important to get your daily dose of the vegetables and fruits and everything else that you need to stay healthy and stay healthy for a really long time. It's hard to get all of what you need in your regular servings at your various meals, and you might be adding daily supplements to that, which is fine, but you need even more because even that doesn't necessarily give you everything you need. And that's where Field of Greens comes in. They have what you need in terms of those nutrients. Field of Greens has fantastic vegetables, including spinach, barley, green tea, ginger, and turmeric. They don't boil it and take out all the key nutrients. They flash freeze it, and that protects those nutrients. Don't look back and say, I should have paid attention to nutrition when I was younger. Field of Greens is a key to better health today and when it matters most. To start, Field of Greens will give you 15% off your first order plus free rush shipping. Visit fieldofgreens.com and use the promo code 3ML. That's promo code 3ML to get 15% off and free shipping at fieldofgreens.com. Fieldofgreens.com. All right, Inez, on to our crazy martini now. Crazy, but probably predictable in a number of ways. Yesterday, the good martini was that justice was actually done in the Hunter Biden case, cut and dried. He was obviously, given the mountain of evidence, clearly addicted to drugs at the time of that gun purchase, and the jury did not take long to find him guilty on all three counts. Over at MSNBC, the wheels were spinning pretty fast. Chuck Todd, former host of Meet the Press, but still over there as one of their political analysts, with a couple of different arguments here that I want to get your thoughts on. First of all, his argument that Hunter Biden, who could have been prosecuted any number of times for his illicit drug use over the years, not to mention the fact that the Justice Department kind of ran out the clock on a number of things that he potentially could have been charged with in terms of his business. Allegedly, they're still looking into some Foreign Agent Registration Act stuff. He's going to face tax charges down the road. But Chuck Todd saying, actually, it's because he's the president's son that the justice system was harder on him. Take a listen.
This is one of those cases where I don't think it's brought if Biden's not president of the United States. This is one of those things. If Biden had chosen not to run in 2018, I doubt Hunter Biden's ever prosecuted for something like this. In some ways, we may look back on this and say he was held more accountable because of who he is, not less accountable because of who he is.
Oh, but it gets even better, Inez, because while Hunter Biden was found guilty on all charges, it's a really, really bad day, of course, for Donald Trump.
But politically, this is a big blow to Trump. And that's, I think, if you're looking for just political fallout, he's trying so hard to create this weaponization. And this has been a Republican talking point for so long. And there's never been any evidence to support what they've said. And now this is, not just no evidence to support. This is evidence to refute all of these claims, the Jim Jordans and the James Comers of the world, who have been trying to manufacture something that really didn't exist as in some form of fealty to Trump.
So, Inez, whether it's about Hunter Biden having a tougher time with the Justice Department because he's Biden's son, or Chuck Todd trying to make the argument that because Hunter Biden's guilty, that means any concerns about how Trump has been prosecuted or charged, all those concerns automatically go away and have no credibility, and in his estimation, never did. What comes to mind?
Yeah, I mean, this is just so far away from the reality of the situation. It's one of those things that takes you aback. So first of all, these charges are probably the single charges, the most obvious charges that could be brought against Hunter Biden that don't involve anything that might implicate Joe Biden in any way, right? None of the influence peddling, none of the, selling his father's influence to the enemies of America, none of that, none of the things that made him millions and millions of dollars, which by the way, it's laughable to suggest that Hunter Biden is being prosecuted because his dad is president, as though people with far fewer connections aren't prosecuted for gun felonies and drug charges every day in this country. It's absurd that he's being prosecuted only for these charges, right? So let's not forget how these prosecutions came about and how we ended up in court with Hunter Biden, right? They tried to offer him a kind of plea deal that would cancel out and render him immune to basically everything else that he's potentially done, that we have a lot of evidence that he's done. And the judge, unusually, this deal was so outside of the norm that the judge stepped in and said, hey, are you the prosecution or the defense? Like, who are you batting for in this courtroom, right? And said this and invalidated the deal. And that's why we're going through with this trial, right? Because he was going to plea. There wasn't going to be a trial. So the idea that this somehow disproves that the justice system, the DOJ, is biased and has a political will of its own in terms of using lawfare instead of politics is completely absurd. That being said, I mean, I think it does vindicate the jury system, right? That there were concerns, just like there were in Manhattan, right, about Donald Trump, that the Biden family, being the princes of Delaware, would have difficulty getting a fair trial. But the evidence on this was open and shut, right? The guy signed a document that said he is not an addict and he's not using drugs, right, in order to buy a gun. And then there's all of his own text messages and video and everything else. There could not be more of an open and shut case on this specific charge, right? The question is, how much else of the mountain of illegal activity that Hunter Biden has committed, in which there is ample evidence that he's committed, is ever going to see a courtroom, is ever going to see any form of justice, right? That's the real question here. Not, I mean, if you look at the evidence of this is like very, very obvious case of guilt, which. By the way, just one note about this trial. Of course, some of the evidence that was submitted was from the Hunter Biden laptop, which confirms once again the government Joe Biden's own government is submitting laptop evidence as though this laptop that all those intelligence officials came out and said was Russian disinformation is in fact authentic, right? It's just a point of worth bringing up on that.
That was going to be my follow-up point, because I don't hear any apologies from MSNBC, and certainly nobody who signed that ridiculous letter late in the 2020 campaign, from Michael Hayden to Jeremy Bash to all these other national security figures who called it riddled with all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. So, Inez, great to have you with us today, and we look forward to having you the rest of the week. Take care.
I'll see you tomorrow, Greg.
Thanks. Inez Stepman is with the Independent Women's Forum. She's also host of the High Noon podcast. Jim Garrity is away. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch if you don't already. Tell your friends to do so as well. Thanks for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us all on X. Inez is at Inez Felcher. Jim is at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a terrific Wednesday. Join us again on Thursday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.